At 28 years old, Susan Winters felt as though she was living the life she had always imagined. After 3 years of marriage to Ryan Winters, she was preparing for what she believed would be their happiest chapter yet. Becoming a mother was something she had dreamed about for years, and with her due date approaching, every day seemed to bring her closer to that dream becoming a reality. The nursery had become her favorite room in the house. She spent hours arranging baby clothes, organizing shelves, and imagining the moment she would finally bring her child home. On weekends, she walked through stores comparing tiny outfits and collecting the little things new parents need. Whenever she pictured the future, Ryan was always there beside her. In her mind, they were building a family that would last forever. But while Susan was planning for the future, Ryan seemed to be pulling away from it. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. His late nights became more frequent. Phone calls were suddenly taken in private. Some evenings, he wouldn't come home until long after Susan had gone to bed. When she asked where he had been, his answers felt rushed and incomplete. At the same time, financial problems began appearing. Bills piled up faster than before, and Ryan seemed unusually stressed whenever money was mentioned. Susan tried to convince herself that everything would work out. After all, preparing for a baby could put pressure on any marriage. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. Then one evening, Susan overheard a conversation that shattered everything she believed. The conversation Susan overheard was never meant for her ears. Ryan was speaking quietly on the phone, but she heard enough to understand the truth. There was another woman. The late nights, the secrecy, and the growing distance suddenly made sense. In a matter of seconds, the future she had spent months planning began to collapse around her. When Susan confronted him, Ryan didn't deny it. Instead, he shifted the blame onto her. He claimed their marriage had changed. He complained about responsibility and pressure. Then he said something Susan would never forget. He told her that the pregnancy had taken away the freedom he wanted. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the heart. The child she already loved had become an excuse for his betrayal. The weeks that followed were filled with arguments. Susan pleaded with Ryan to think about their family, but every conversation seemed to push him further away. He twisted her words, made her question herself, and convinced her that she was somehow responsible for the problems in their marriage. Despite the pain, Susan refused to give up. She still believed the man she married was somewhere beneath the anger and excuses. Then came the day everything finally broke apart. Ryan told Susan he wanted her gone. Shocked and desperate, she turned to his mother, hoping she would help. Instead, his mother sided with him and insisted it was best for everyone if Susan left. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. 8 months pregnant and days away from giving birth, she was being abandoned by the people she thought were family. Within hours, her belongings were stuffed into trash bags and placed outside. Susan stood on the porch crying as the reality of her situation sank in. Then Ryan shut the door. The lock clicked into place. And just like that, she was alone. But being thrown out was only the beginning of her nightmare. Standing alone with nowhere to go, Susan Winters did the only thing she could think of. She called friends she trusted, hoping someone would answer. One by one, the calls went unanswered. Some never picked up. Others listened to her situation and said they couldn't help. Her closest relatives lived hundreds of miles away, making it impossible for them to reach her in time. For the first time in her life, Susan felt completely abandoned. The days that followed were some of the hardest she had ever faced. She spent hours sitting in public parks, trying to figure out what to do next. Some nights were spent inside bus stations where she could stay warm for a few hours without attracting attention. She wore loose clothing whenever possible, hoping to avoid questions about her pregnancy. Every day became a struggle to find safety, food, and a place to rest. As the reality of her situation settled in, Fear began to consume her thoughts. Soon she would be bringing a child into the world, yet she couldn't even provide a roof over their heads. She wondered how she would protect her baby. She wondered whether she was strong enough to survive what was happening. Most of all, she wondered why the people she loved had turned their backs on her when she needed them the most. Then came a freezing night that pushed her to her limit. While sitting alone in a nearly empty park, Susan felt a sudden pain shoot through her body. First, she tried to ignore it, but moments later another pain followed. Then another. Panic spread through her chest as she realized something was wrong. The contractions had started far earlier than she expected. Weak, exhausted, and terrified, Susan stumbled toward a nearby bench before her legs finally gave out beneath her. As Susan collapsed onto the park bench, someone was quietly watching. As Susan Winters struggled to stay conscious on the park bench, a man who appeared to be in his late 70s slowly approached. He was neatly dressed, carried himself with quiet confidence, and seemed unusually calm despite the urgency of the situation. His name was Mr. Thomas. Without asking questions, he offered Susan a bottle of water and something to eat. But after everything she had been through, trust did not come easily. The betrayal by Ryan Winters and the rejection she had experienced over the past weeks had left deep scars. Susan politely refused and tried to convince him that she would be fine on her own. Mr. Thomas didn't argue. He simply remained nearby, speaking gently and reassuring her that she wasn't alone. As her condition worsened, he made a phone call and arranged for medical assistance. He then ensured she had a safe place to stay while waiting for further care. For the first time since being forced out of her home, Susan felt a small sense of relief. Yet something about the situation felt unusual. Most people would have offered a few kind words and continued on with their lives. But Mr. Thomas seemed determined to help. He checked on her constantly, spoke with doctors, and made sure every detail was taken care of. It was as though helping Susan had become a personal mission. What Susan didn't know was that Mr. Thomas recognized something about her that would change both their lives forever. Shortly after arriving at the hospital, Susan Winters was rushed into the delivery room. The contractions had become stronger, and there was no more time to wait. After hours of uncertainty, fear, and exhaustion, she finally heard the sound she had been longing for. Her baby had arrived. Despite everything Susan had endured, a healthy baby girl was born. Outside the room, Mr. Thomas waited patiently. Hour after hour, he remained in the hospital, refusing to leave until he knew both Susan and her daughter were safe. The nurses noticed his concern and assumed he was a relative. In truth, they had only met a short time earlier. A few days later, when Susan was strong enough to sit and talk, Mr. Thomas finally explained why he had become so involved in her life. Decades earlier, he had known Susan's late mother. They had been close friends when they were younger, and during one of the most difficult periods of his life, her mother had stepped in to help him when no one else would. Over the years, Mr. Thomas never forgot that act of kindness. After learning of her passing, he spent years wondering what had happened to her family. When he saw Susan in the park, something about her immediately reminded him of her mother. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Once he learned her name, he realized exactly who she was. As he shared the story, Susan struggled to hold back her emotions. Thinking about her mother had always been painful, but hearing how her kindness had impacted someone so deeply brought tears to her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt as though she wasn't completely alone. But Mr. Thomas had one more surprise that nobody expected. The surprise Mr. Thomas revealed was something Susan Winters never expected. He wanted to help her rebuild her life. What began as a chance encounter in a park became a turning point for her future. Mr. Thomas helped Susan secure a safe place to live and encouraged her to complete the professional training she had put on hold during her pregnancy. Whenever she faced obstacles, he reminded her that her story was far from over. Months passed, and Susan slowly regained the confidence she had lost. With Mr. Thomas helping care for her daughter when needed, she was able to focus on creating a better future. Eventually, she secured a stable job and began building a loving home for her little girl. For the first time since being forced out of her house, she felt hopeful about what lay ahead. As Susan's life improved, word of her success eventually reached Ryan Winters. The woman he had abandoned was no longer struggling to survive. She was moving forward without him. Before long, Ryan reached out and asked to see her. He claimed he had made a terrible mistake. He spoke about regret, apologized for his actions, and said he wanted another chance. For Susan, the request opened old wounds she had worked so hard to heal. Part of her remembered the life they once planned together. Another part remembered the cold night she stood alone outside a locked door with nowhere to go. Now, Susan faced the most difficult decision she had encountered since the day everything fell apart. After days of reflection, Susan Winters made her decision. She listened to Ryan Winters' apologies and acknowledged the regret he claimed to feel, but she could not forget the night he abandoned her when she was at her most vulnerable. Too much had happened since then. Susan had fought her way through pain, uncertainty, and heartbreak to build a new life for herself and her daughter. She chose to move forward rather than return to the past. For Ryan, the reality of his choices finally became impossible to ignore. The woman he had blamed and pushed away had become stronger without him. Susan no longer needed his approval, his promises, or his support to succeed. The future he once walked away from was now a future he could only watch from a distance. Months later, Susan and her daughter paid a visit to Mr. Thomas. The man who had found her at her lowest point had become an important part of their lives. Together, they shared stories, laughter, and memories of the journey that had brought them together. Looking around the room, Susan realized that family is not always defined by blood. Sometimes it is defined by the people who choose to stand beside you when everyone else walks away. Susan's story is a reminder that even during life's darkest moments, hope can appear when you least expect it. The people who hurt us may leave lasting scars, but they can also lead us toward unexpected blessings. Sometimes the people who break your heart make room for the people who save your life. If you were Susan Winters, would you have forgiven Ryan Winters? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.